I'll just start off by saying, add my thanks to Sheffield for this great, for hosting the event. That's how much I appreciated listening to all of you over the past day and a half, hearing the wonderful things that you've been doing. I like this yearly update to check in and see what everyone's been up to. And listening to some of the presentations, to Chris and to you, to some others, and to hear the progress that you're making. I was discussing yesterday with Chris about how, sometimes in our business, perfection is the enemy of progress, right? If we wait for everything to be perfect, then we're not going to continue. We're not going to make progress. And so it's great to see those of you who are diving in, getting your hands dirty, which is most of you, and see the great things that you're doing. So thank you for sharing all that with us. So looking back 4 years ago, I think we were in New York. I'm not sure about that. Who was here in 2013 at the RAG? Not many. Wow, okay. So I gave a presentation similar to the one I'm going to give now, a little bit of behind the scenes. The template was not as pretty as we have now, but since most of you in the room were not here then, I figured it's a good time to give an update. And even those of you who were here then, a lot has changed in the world around us, in the world of development, and specifically in what we're doing in development for Rosetta. So I think we thought it's a good time to provide you a little bit of a behind the scenes. And if you take out of this session a few things, first of all, I'll mention towards the end some of the activities we've been up to outside of the development process itself. And if you're able to take some of those things home back to your developers or back to your team and mention, hey, do you guys know that Ex Libris was working on this or that? So I'll consider it to have been a successful presentation. So I'll talk to you a little bit about who we are and what we work on here in Rosetta Development. I'll talk to you about our development process, what goes into making this tool that we all use. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the activities outside of pure development that we're working on, some things you might have seen in press releases or you might have seen in the community, and I'll mention those and call those out specifically so we can grab your attention just a little bit more there. So who are these people in Rosetta Development? I heard this wonderful term, the black hole. We love hearing that, the black hole. That really is, that's great. So who's in that black hole? What are they doing? So there are different types of people that we have. We've got business analysts. Ofer is the main one, of course. You know him. We've got developers, the guys we give pizza to and they give you back code, hopefully. We've got quality assurance engineers, people who are running the tests and who understand the requirements, make sure that more or less it does what we say it's supposed to do. We've got DBAs who are making sure that the database runs efficiently and effectively. Performance architects. You've heard Adi talk yesterday about the performance team that we've created, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And what are the types of things that those folks are doing? So we do requirements analysis, right? Adi gives us the requirements, working with you. We have to understand what that means, how we translate those into functional specifications. And that right there is probably the hardest handoff for those of you who have had a development background, right? The hardest handoff in all of computer science. How do you take someone who speaks English and translate that into whatever developers and technical people speak, which is definitely not English or any other language. And then from that, we turn that into detailed technical designs, right? How we're going to take those specifications and make the program actually do that. We do the coding itself, the development. We have a whole quality assurance team, which is running test cases, both manually and automated. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. We do a lot of performance testing. Okay, last year I talked a little bit about how to ingest at scale in Rosetta, for those of you for whom that's relevant. Not for everyone, but for those of you for whom it's relevant. And so we spend a lot of time doing performance testing. And we also are that third line support, right? When we validate that it is a bug and it comes into development, we have to make sure we take time and fix those bugs as well. And one of the things about Rosetta that makes it a little bit different than the other products that we have at Ex Libris is really, I think it was used yesterday, this presentation was talked about the continuum between plug and play and highly customizable, right? The goal for us for Rosetta, even more so than other products, is to be able to make a product that you can use out of the box, which has as much functionality built in, has as much workflows that are working end to end without having to customize and without having to do additional development. So it will work for those use cases. and it will go all the way on to the other side of the spectrum, which is heavy customization, heavy integrations, heavy development. And so that makes, for us, an environment which is challenging, right? Because we have to be able to test all of the out-of-the-box configurations. And we also want to test and make sure that all of those unique workflows and those integration scenarios work as well. Okay? So that's a challenge which I find exciting, but it is challenging nonetheless. So Adi mentioned this yesterday, and I think it's just to kind of bring a little bit of the technical side of this additional team that we've established over the past year or so. And so this technical team that we've established is responsible for a few areas. Those monthly security scans that we talked about now. So instead of waiting for you to get back to us and say, hey, we have a report, we still get those reports, but hopefully we're cutting those off before they come. So we're doing our own proactive monthly security scans. They deal with performance. So I mentioned that before. You know, performance is a big aspect. Performance is never done, right? You only abandon it. You can never be done, but we can always make it better. And so, you know, for those institutions for whom ingesting at scale is important, we're constantly working on performance. They deal with all of the infrastructure aspects, so all of the operating system aspects, the upgrades, the service pack, the install, all of the infrastructure things, less functional things. And they are responsible for any database optimizations or database work that has to be done as well, working closely with the DBA team. I mentioned the performance testing, so they're responsible for our performance lab environment. And I'll give you some details in a minute about what that lab looks like, but we also do weekly performance benchmarking. So that means that as a part of our build process, right, we want to make sure that we don't have any performance regressions. So we've got functional programmers who are in there making all sorts of changes to the code and adding new features and fixing bugs. And of course, we're always worried about, in addition to there being functional regressions we want to make sure that we don't have, we're also worried about there being performance regressions as well. So we have a set of bench lines that we have that say, in this version, we were able to ingest this amount of material with these file types in this amount of time. And that's our benchmark. And every week we run our development version through that same performance benchmark to make sure that there's no regression in performance there. So that's a big kind of step in the right direction that we've taken in recent time, and that helps us to ensure that we're going the right way when it comes to performance and not the wrong way. And Adi mentioned this as well yesterday, but we also, they've been working on a database monitoring tool which will help us to proactively find areas in the application which are under real use. Of course, you know, the irony of software development is that everything works great in your lab, right? Always. Everything always works great in the lab. And the question is, when you meet the real world, what happens? And so we can install this tool on request or by request at a customer's installation. And that will give us proactive reports about slow UI screens, about slow database queries. Really is a tool that helps us to kind of figure out if a customer is having performance problems, to get down under the hood to figure out what's going on. So they've been working on that tool as well. So this team has helped us, or separating out these functions into a separate team, has helped us put a greater focus there while not hurting the general pace of functional developments as well. So I mentioned this performance lab, so just to kind of give you a little bit of behind the scenes of what we're talking about. And again, not every institution is looking for, you know, bare metal, Ferrari type performance, okay? So we want to make sure that we don't, you know, that we're focused on this, but not exclusively. But of course, as I said, there's something that you can never be finished with performance. You can always get better. And so we do put effort and time and investment into our performance activities. So we have a dedicated lab for performance testing, which has 3 all-in-one application servers, okay? And each one has, you know, it's relatively beefy for today's environment. Of course, you never have enough RAM, right? How much is the right amount of RAM? More? So 24 CPUs and 32 gigabytes of RAM. We got about 3.5 terabytes of storage in this environment too. Some people are saying, wow, that's a lot. Some people are saying, you kidding me? That's our daily ingest rates. But you know, everyone in their own place. And we have about 13 million records in permanence. So we mentioned too that we're now actually able to use real data from a customer who's got that in their permanent repository. So again, reality versus perception, we can create, versus testing, we can create all of the the test data we want to, but there's nothing like getting actual real data from the customer to be able to, to test against and be able to ingest real scenarios. Of course, this is not going to cover everyone's scenario because everyone's workload is slightly different, but it moves us in the right direction. So again, a heavy investment in this performance lab since our last discussion, since our last presentation. Okay, so this is just, again, kind of behind the scenes a little bit. You know, Rosetta is not a small application. It's definitely not one of those test demo type things. You can bring up a hello world. It's quite a bit more than that. It's got about 10,000 code files, about 2 million lines of code. And then for those of you who are, more interested in the technical aspects, there are some names you recognize there. It's a pretty standard development stack. It's Java. It's Tomcat. Oracle as the backend database, Solr as the full text index and search index. So that's a little bit about who the development team is, what we work on, and I'll talk now a little bit about our development process. So, development processes are always, in the industry in general, right, are always in flux. We developers or technical types have to keep ourselves employed by constantly reinventing the way that we do things. Whatever we did yesterday is by definition wrong, because what we're doing today is right. Of course, that means that what we're doing today is wrong. What we do tomorrow, anyway, it doesn't matter. But we are, of course, not immune or to those changes. And while we don't necessarily run after every trend in the technical world, we do keep up with what's happening and try to take catchphrases like continuous deployment, continuous build, etc., into our world as well. So what's a little bit about how do we develop this Rosetta thing? So this is a pretty standard development process, right? For those of you in software development, you get requirements in from the user group, from the product manager, from potential customers. You decide on whatever the scope, what's in that release, right? What's going to be worked on, what the priorities are. You design those features that have been requested, both functional specifications and technical design. You do the actual coding, you do the testing, and then you rinse and repeat, right? It's a constant cycle. And so for us, that development process is pretty standard, and that's what we do for every version. Now, within the versions of Rosetta, though, what we do is we break it up into sprints. So even though you only see a version every, 4 to 6 months, really, we're actually doing monthly sprints within the development team. So every month we have a version that can be released. Of course, there are some epics that kind of go longer over a few months, right? But we have some version of the software which is in theory can be released, and we package that up every month, and it goes through the testing and packaging process. So even though you're getting that version or that package version only once every couple months, we actually have an internal version every month that we're working on. And the cycle is, again, during this monthly cycle goes into the testing and design phases as well. So during 1 month, we're looking forward to the next month. We're working on all the designs for the next month. So we're designing the functionality, doing the technical design, having meetings to do all the design reviews. The tests are being written in design. So all that work is happening during 1 month, and then the next month the coding is actually happening, right? And then during the third month is all the QA and the building and the documentation and all that process. So that cycle kind of happens over that 3-month period, so that at the end of that period you've got all of the functionality that was built during that month packaged and ready to go. So agile monthly sprints, which are then packaged up into a release that you see periodically. So the tool set that we're using, again, is a pretty standard tool set in our industry. So for task management, we're using JIRA from Atlassian. Okay, so we love JIRA, of course. Who doesn't love JIRA? And that helps us manage all of our tasks, all of our bugs, our developments. Everything is in JIRA. If it's not in JIRA, it does not exist. For build management, we use Jenkins, also another popular open source tool, and that handles all of our nightly builds, all of our continuous deployment, all of our tests to run, through Jenkins, so we're heavily invested there as well, and I'll show some screenshots in a moment. A more recent addition that we've actually deployed across the company now is a tool called TestRail, which we use for test management. So this is more of the manual test management that we do. So all of the QA managing the test designs, managing the execution, managing the reporting, and then circling back into JIRA for the bugs. So that's a new tool. Again, I'll show you a screenshot of each of these in a moment. And then for our test automation, more or less the only game in town these days is Selenium for web testing. So that's what we use for our automatic test suite. So I mentioned JIRA before. So a task for everything. Everything has its task, right? So JIRA, we use JIRA JIRA Agile to manage our backlog from the product management, to manage our development process, to manage bugs from the support team and from QA. So really everything that the development team is doing is managed inside of JIRA. So really a tool that is our kind of home base for everything that happens in development. And that helps us also to kind of track and see how the team is doing, right? So always looking at team velocity to make sure that we're meeting the commitments that we made to product management, meeting the commitments that we made to support in terms of bug fixes. We can get heads up warning if we're not making those commitments to make sure if we have to do scope changes. So kind of everything for us is really centered around that, and it helps us to continually look at ourselves and try to make ourselves more efficient and more effective. So that's JIRA. From the build side on Jenkins, we have a build environment of around or more than 30 servers within the Rosetta kind of build and testing environment. And part of the reason there is because we are handling a lot of complexity, different environments, different operating systems, different databases, and I'll mention in a minute about kind of the test suite that we do and how we run this test suite on many of these different servers. So we had about 30 servers that we're using to do various deployment and testing scenarios, and that's all run out of Jenkins. So Jenkins does our nightly build, it does our nightly deployment, it does our test suite, it runs the performance benchmark that I mentioned earlier. Everything that we do comes out of Jenkins, and it gives us back our feedback. How did we do? Anything broken? Any tests broken? Everything there comes out of Jenkins. I mentioned TestRail a moment ago. So really the entire QA process is now being managed at a TestRail, which is a big step forward for us. We're writing our test cases there. We're executing the test and tracking execution within TestRail. We are following our pass-fail rate. We get daily dashboards and reports that come out about how the version's going along. Again, this is not our regression suite, our automated suite. This is for manual testing that the QA team does in order to make sure that, hey, all the new functionality we said it's going to do this, is it really doing that? Okay, and so all that now is managed and comes out of TestRail. It's great for reporting. It gives the team leaders and managers kind of a bird's eye view of what's going on and helps us to figure out what has to be worked on in terms of kind of in-version fixes of issues that come up during the QA process. And I know that there's a lot of interest around the nightly automated test, and here this is, from the beginning, even from 4 years ago, we had a heavy investment in automated tests, and the reason is because, again, we've mentioned it's a complex product which has a lot of out-of-the-box scenarios, has a lot of opportunities for integrations, and we continue to add functionality and add integration points, and really the only way to ensure a high level of quality is to have a large number of automated tests, right? There's no way that our QA engineers, we don't want them doing regression tests. We want them to focus on the new functionality that we've added and to make sure that there was not a communication breakdown, right? It's kind of easy to test what it did yesterday and make sure it still does it today. But this new feature, did the developer understand? We want a human being in there to kind of do that validation of our new functionality. And so our QA team is doing manual tests mostly around the new functionality, and our regression is all handled by automated tests. And so we have around 730 tests that are run nightly So that's quite a large number for us. And these are full integration tests. These aren't unit tests, the thousands of unit tests, does this piece of code, does what you want to do. These are workflows, 730 workflows, full integration tests from UI to database and back again. And we run those on 5 different topologies. Again, because Rosetta is an installed product, we can handle, we have to be able to support different operating systems, Solaris and Linux. We have different versions of Oracle that we support, Oracle 11 and Oracle 12. We have different topologies, right? We've got distributed topologies where we have different roles on different servers. You have delivery and deposit separate from your back office and your indexing. We have load balancer topologies. And so we want to be able to make sure that we cover all of those different topologies. We want those regression tests to run on all those different topologies. So a good number of those 30 servers that we talked about a few minutes ago are actually involved in our nightly test suite. And we also want to test different scenarios to be able to handle install and rollback to make sure that, hey, we've installed it, we've run the automated tests to make sure that they work, then we roll it back. I want to run the same automated test to make sure that it still worked the way it was supposed to work in the previous version. I want to test different authentication types. For those of you who are in the newer versions, you know that we now support authentication types natively to Rosetta, SAML, local authentication, and we also support PDS still. And so we want to make sure that all those different authentication types work as well. So really a number of different variations, almost like a Cartesian product of all the different variations that we support. And so, again, not perfect. The question is, are we going in the right direction? And so there's a continual investment in increasing that number. And so I would say, I don't remember the exact, we can look back at the presentation a few years ago. There was definitely several hundred test scenarios, fewer than we have today. So we're continually adding more test scenarios as more functionality is added. So this is really our green percentage there. I know that one of our development team leaders, I came in his office and he literally has laminated a printout of the Jenkins when they were 99.9% pass rate. He was so proud, he printed it out, laminated it, stuck it on his bulletin board. So we have a heavy focus on what's our green, what's our pass rate to make sure that we're keeping the regressions to a minimum. Adi mentioned also yesterday the new user interface, which you've seen the front end on, but just a word a little bit about the investment that we made from the back end. We had to have people to actually do that work, and so we've had a focus on the skills required to do that, right? On CSS, on JavaScript, on HTML. We've been working closely with the ProQuest UX team. For those of you who are also Alma customers, you know that there is a new Alma UI coming out, and the ProQuest UX team worked with the Alma group as well. So Rosetta has benefited from that same partnership, and they've helped us along with the new UI, or the refreshed UI of Rosetta. And we also are collaborating internally, right? So as the Primo team started to do work on their, patron-facing or Primo new UI, and that influenced the way that the Alma team worked on their new UI, which influenced the way that the Rosetta team worked on their refreshed UI, and so there's a lot of internal collaboration happening as well. Again, just like performance, user interface, user experience is a never-ending job, right? It doesn't end tomorrow. You don't do, the UI is done, we are now finished. It's a continual effort. It's a continual dedication. We have now a bucket of time that we put during every sprint to UI and UX issues, new workflows. We take it with the UI team to make sure that we're continuing those standards and continuing in the right direction. And then we continue to invest in each sprint to address issues, to address areas that we haven't gotten to, or that could stand some additional improvements. So there's a continual effort around user interface as well. So that's a little bit about who we are, about what we do, about how we build this thing, a little behind the scenes of some of the infrastructure that's involved in putting this together every month. I'll talk now a little bit about some activities that are not necessarily pure development, not sitting in front of Eclipse and writing code all day. So one of the things that was mentioned here several times in the developer network, as you know, we've put as a company a focus on openness, on APIs, on integrations, a renewed focus over the past couple of years, and Rosetta is no different. So the Rosetta Developer Network homepage And really there we've got, aside from the actual documentation, which is of course all of the SDKs, the APIs themselves, the viewers, we also have a blog post that either we're writing or that some customers are writing. We partner with you. Since our last advisory group meeting, there's been at least a blog or Rosetta blog posted every month, so that's great. So for those of you who are not aware, there's an RSS feed on the Developer Network blog, so you're welcome to subscribe to that RSS feed and get the posts as they come out. Again, we're always encouraging, every year I put in a plug, we're always encouraging more communal involvement. Posting a blog is simple. If you need help or would like to partner with us to post a blog, we're happy to help you. As you know, Ofer's written a few, and we're happy to work with you. Again, not in terms of where to put your code, but just in terms of there being a place, an RSS subscribed place that you can kind of get the word out in between these advisor group meetings or in between the user group meetings on what you've been up to from an integration perspective. Seen some great sessions. I'm jotting down notes for the past day and a half about people who are going to hit up for blog posts so that people who were not here in the session can benefit from that as well. And then you can use the blog to also point to your code, which is in GitHub or wherever else it might be. And as I mentioned here, we've got all the documentation for all the integrations and all of the technical work that you're doing. So the SDK to build plugins, viewers, all of the APIs documented here. This is the home base for all those things. And I'll just kind of shout out to a few particular blog posts from the past couple of months. There was one that Karen is one of our QA engineers, published on how to publish full text from Rosetta to Primo. So integration scenario that someone might be interested in. So how you can take content, PDF files that are stored in Rosetta, how to publish the full text to Primo so that the text is indexed and searchable in Primo. So this blog post kind of walks through that end-to-end integration scenario. So as you can see from this, sometimes the blog posts are very technical, right? Sometimes they're, hey, we did this plugin and here's the code for that plugin. And sometimes the blog posts are more, workflow, end-to-end workflows. Here's how we integrated between these two products, between this system and another system, and here are the interfaces that we used. And so it's kind of like a recipe that other institutions can benefit from. Again, the goal here is, as a part of that community, to share so that no one is reinventing the wheel. They're all benefiting from the work that everyone else is doing. So this is one that you might be interested in. And then over on the GitHub side, those of you who knew that Rosetta, that Ex Libris has a GitHub institution account. Okay, about half. That's a little bit more than half. That's good. I'm glad to see that. So Ex Libris does have a presence on GitHub, and those of you who knew that the biggest number of repositories in the Ex Libris GitHub is Rosetta, who knew that? Nice, excellent. 42 as of yesterday, 42 repositories in the Ex Libris GitHub organization are Rosetta based. And so all of these are, wherever we can make some code that we're working on or a plugin that we're working on public, we do make that available in GitHub. And so you can head over to the Ex Libris GitHub location, type in Rosetta, get a filtered list of all of the various plugins and apps and scripts that we've published to there. And so here you've got, for example, the integration scenario that we mentioned yesterday that you can integrate between Alma and Rosetta. You can manage your metadata inside of Alma. You can manage your files inside of Rosetta. So there was kind of a nice diagram on the screen there, right, of this talks nicely to this guy, and then they all shake hands in the middle, and everyone's all happy. So that is done with a plugin that is available on GitHub. And then usually when we publish or post some code to GitHub, we post a blog post that goes along with it to kind of explain more of the background for what's happening there. So this post by Ofer, preserving digitized Alma content with Rosetta, kind of walks through that end-to-end scenario of how to integrate Alma and Rosetta and how to use the plugin that's published on GitHub in order to do that. Also got some examples of storage plugins. So for those of you who, again, works out of the box, right? If you just install Rosetta, you can start using the NFS storage right out of the box. But one of the strengths of Rosetta is you can extend it, and the way that you do that, to extend it to talk to other types of storage systems, is through storage plugins. So we have a few examples here of different types of plugins that talk to different types of storage, or that can handle different ways of storing the files within NFS, if you're not happy with the way that we do it today. So you've got a bunch of storage plugins available on GitHub as well. And the last piece that I'll mention on GitHub is external viewers. So we've got a bunch of examples of external viewers. Again, Rosetta will work out of the box with the viewers that are bundled. And you can also make external viewers, and you can configure, or you can create VPPs, which are preprocessors that do all of the work with the files and then hand them off to the viewers ready to be consumed. So we've got several of those examples on GitHub as well, how to create various preprocessors for a few different types of external viewers. So again, the takeaways there are subscribe or hook up to the RSS feed to be able to keep track of what's happening on the tech blog. If you haven't, or even if you have already, we'd love to get another post from you for the tech blog, and we're happy to work with you to make that happen. And then you can also take a look at, if you're looking for some code example, you can of course look in Google. You can also head over to our GitHub to take a look and see if there's an example of what you're trying to do already available. Adi mentioned yesterday as well the work we've been doing in the open source community. So here's a little bit of giving back to Jove. And so we're happy to participate there as well. And then finally, this year at Eluna, at the tech seminar, which is 2 days of sessions, of technically oriented sessions before the actual Eluna conference. So there were 4 Rosetta sessions and a dedicated track for Rosetta. So it was good to see some Rosetta content at Eluna. So we had over 2 days, 4 different Rosetta sessions. And I know that we've planned some webinars to provide those sessions again to those who were not at Eluna, so you can keep an eye out for that as well. But that's some additional. First one's next week, great. So some additional content that we've been working on in order to be able to bring you some of the stuff that we've posted blogs about or posted to GitHub, but more as a walkthrough, as a training session to see how some of those things can be put into place. Okay, so the takeaway then, if I have to sum up the entire session, is really that you've made an investment in Rosetta, and behind the scenes, I want you to know that Rosetta is a large product with a lot of functionality. Okay, that's developed and maintained by a dedicated professional staff in a complex development environment. We try to account for as many different variations as we can, and backed by solid development procedures that help us to continue to deliver value to the investment that you've made.